I've always believed some people carry a certain kind of silence with them, not peaceful but heavy. That's exactly how it felt the first time I met Claire. She was standing behind the counter of her father's funeral home, typing on an old computer. The way she looked up at me and that subtle, unreadable expression stuck with me longer than it should have. I was there for a friend's wake, someone I hadn't seen in years but felt obligated to visit. The whole place smelled of aged wood and fading flowers. Not unpleasant, just still. Claire greeted me softly, her voice so quiet I wasn't sure she'd actually spoken. There was something about her that made it hard to look away. We spoke for the first time outside where I'd gone for air after the service. She was sitting on a bench near the back door, legs crossed, cigarette barely lit. When I apologized for interrupting, she said, "You're not." Her tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either, more like she was used to speaking to ghosts. I learned her name later that evening when I went back to thank her for the way she handled everything. "Cla," she said. No last name, no smile, just that same distant stare. She looked like someone you'd dream about and forget by morning, but the kind of dream that lingers uncomfortably in your chest. The next week I dropped by again under the pretense of picking up something I'd left behind. It was a lie, but Claire didn't question it. She asked me to wait in a back room while she looked around. The walls were lined with antique clocks, none ticking, all stopped at different times. Eventually we started meeting regularly. Coffee, late-night walks near the cemetery behind the funeral home. Claire didn't talk much, and when she did, every word sounded carefully chosen. She once told me she didn't like mirrors after dark. When I asked why, she said, "Because things don't always reflect what they should." There was something magnetic about her detachment, like she was observing life instead of living it. I noticed she never touched anything directly with her hands unless necessary. She'd use her sleeve, the corner of a napkin, even a pen to press buttons. When I asked if she had OCD, she said no, just preferences. The more time I spent with her, the more I felt like I was slipping into a place that didn't exist on any map. Nothing ever felt wrong, just slightly off, like a quiet hum behind every moment. But by then, I was already falling for her. And when you're in deep enough, weird starts to feel normal. One night we sat together in the embalming room. Not as strange as it sounds. Claire said it was the only place she felt calm. The stainless steel reflected the low yellow light in warped streaks like everything was quietly melting. She sat on the edge of the metal table, legs swinging slowly like a kid on a swing set. I asked if working there ever got to her. She looked at me for a long time before answering. "You get used to it," she said. "Eventually, silence feels safer than noise." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. That night, I noticed something strange. A small unmarked door in the corner of the room. A keypad was mounted beside it, newer than anything else in the building. I asked what was in there. Claire didn't look up from her cup of tea. "That's my dad's space," she said. "No one goes in there." After that, things began to shift. Claire started canceling plans. Sometimes she'd text me in the middle of the night, single words like still or backwards. I'd ask what she meant, but she never replied. It didn't feel like a game. It felt like she wasn't sending them to me. The funeral home itself began to change too. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the reflection of those old clocks. Once, I saw what looked like a second shadow following Claire down the hallway. But when I turned, nothing was there. I told myself it was just my eyes adjusting to the dim light. I wanted to believe that. The last time I visited, Claire seemed on edge. Her father was out of town, and she asked me to stay the night. She gave me a room upstairs, one she said they never used. The window was nailed shut from the inside. When I asked why, she said, "Sometimes the ones who haven't left try to come back." That night I woke around 2:30 a.m. to the sound of soft footsteps outside my door. I thought it was Claire. But when I cracked the door open, the hallway was empty. All the clocks in the building were ticking again, faint but synchronized. I could feel it in my chest, like they were counting down to something. I went downstairs half expecting to find Claire in the embalming room. But it was empty, except the keypad door was open. It hung ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of pitch-black nothing. No shelves, no walls, just dark, like it went on forever. I called her name, but the only thing I heard was breathing. Something breathing from the other side. I backed away slowly. The air seeping out of that darkness was cold, unnaturally so. It smelled like damp stone and old sealed air. I wanted to believe it was a storage room, a tunnel, anything else. But there was no draft, no sound, except that slow, unsteady breath. Then Claire appeared behind me without a sound. I jumped. Her eyes looked strange in the low light, dilated, unfocused. She didn't seem surprised that the door was open. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. When I asked what was in there, she said, "Something that remembers." I asked what she meant. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand over mine and gently guided me away. She closed the door, typed a code into the keypad, and the lock clicked. "It forgets easier when no one looks at it," she said. Her voice trembled, the first time I'd ever heard fear in it. We sat in the front parlor afterward, both silent. Claire looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying something for years that had suddenly grown heavier. Finally, I asked, "What's really going on here?" She stared at the floor. "My mother didn't die, at least, not completely." She told me her father had tried to contact something after her mother passed unexpectedly. A ritual, a bargain, or maybe just grief gone too far. He opened a door he couldn't fully close. And ever since, the thing behind it wears her mother's voice. It asks to be let out when it forgets who it is. Claire said she hears it sometimes through the walls, especially at night. That's why the windows are nailed shut. Why some rooms are never used. Why her father sleeps with a radio playing static beside his bed. "It's not evil," she said, "but it doesn't belong here anymore." I realized then that Claire had been raised with this, not just the dead, but what comes after. I never went back after that night. Claire stopped replying to texts, and eventually the funeral home changed ownership. Months later, I drove by. The building looked the same, too quiet for a place meant for the dead. The windows were still nailed shut, but I swear one of the clocks in the upstairs window was ticking. Sometimes I still hear from her. Not in person, not online. Just strange things. A voicemail filled with static and distant breathing, or a letter in my mailbox with no return address, only one word written inside. Remember? I try not to think about the door, or what was behind it, but it still shows up in my dreams, and in those dreams Claire is always there, sitting on the metal table in the embalming room, swinging her legs, staring past me like she's waiting for something to come through. I never stay asleep long enough to see what follows. I always wake up cold, always at 2:30 a.m. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.